As flames consume the great library of Alexandria, a nameless poet struggles to preserve the city's wisdom through secret verses written amid chaos. Alongside Selene, a warrior sworn to protect, and Telemachus, an aging scholar, he hides the last scrolls from destruction. In a race against fire and time, his words become an act of rebellion, proof that while empires fall and knowledge burns, memory endures beyond the ashes.
I am a poet, though names and titles seem trivial when weighed against the weight of what surrounds me. Here, in the heart of Alexandria, where the sun spills its gold upon marble and scroll, I have made my sanctuary. The great library, this vast repository of human thought, stretches before me like a sleeping giant, its corridors endless, and its treasures beyond measure. Each scroll, each tome, is a voice from a distant age, a whisper of minds long past but not forgotten. Here, in these hallowed halls, the collective endeavor of humanity is etched in ink and preserved on fragile parchment. I walk beneath towering columns, their surfaces worn smooth by the touch of countless hands, scholars, scribes, seekers of truth. The air is thick with the scent of aged papyrus and beeswax, mingled with the faint musk of stone warmed by the sun. Light filters in through latticed windows, casting intricate patterns upon the floors where generations have tread. The sound of rustling pages and murmured debate forms a tapestry of quiet reverence. It is here that knowledge breathes alive, breathing, pulsing with the promise of discovery and understanding. I have spent years wandering these corridors, a humble witness to the great symphony of intellect that echoes within. The library is not merely a building but a living testament to human ambition, a beacon that draws the curious and the learned alike. Yet, beneath this grandeur, a shadow stirs, the city beyond these walls hums with unrest. Political factions quarrel in whispered councils, their ambitions and fears seeping into the streets like a gathering storm. I see it in the furrowed brows of the scholars, the tightened grip of the guards, the furtive glances exchanged in the marketplace. The peace upon which this bastion of knowledge rests feels brittle, as if one careless breath might shatter it. From my vantage point by a high window, I watch the city bustle beneath the fading light. The harbor thrums with ships bound for distant lands, merchants call out their wares, children dart through narrow alleys, and soldiers patrol with wary eyes. All life seems to pulse with urgency, as if sensing the inevitable. Within me, a quiet storm brews a blend of awe and dread. How fragile this splendor seems when held against the relentless tide of time and human folly. The library, for all its wisdom, is but a fragile flame flickering against the encroaching night. As dusk gathers, I light a small oil lamp, its soft glow casting warm light upon the scrolls piled at my side. The flame dances, casting shadows that leap and recede like memories too fleeting to grasp. In this fragile light, I commit my thoughts to parchment, weaving verses that honor the legacy I am privileged to witness. Words, I believe, possess a strange power, one that may endure beyond the reach of fire and ruin. Tonight I write not only as a poet, but as a keeper of memory. For I sense that the days ahead will test the very fabric of our civilization, and that the fate of Alexandria's great library hangs in precarious balance. Yet even in the face of loss, I hold fast to a fragile hope that knowledge, once born into the world, can never be truly extinguished. So begins my tale, a chronicle of light and shadow, of human endeavor and hubris, of a city whose soul is woven from scrolls and stories. What follows is the story of the burning library, and of the verses I inscribe in its final hours, verses that may yet outlast the flames. Even now, as the city sleeps beneath a sky smeared with stars, I hear the distant murmur of voices, some hopeful, some fearful, carrying on the night breeze. The hour is late, but my vigil has only just begun. For in these moments between darkness and dawn, the fragile flame of knowledge must be tended with care, lest it be lost forever. I do not know what the morrow will bring, but I know this: as long as words remain, so too does the spirit of Alexandria, defiant and enduring. And so I write, with trembling hands and a heart full of sorrow and resolve. The corridors of the great library stretched before me like veins coursing through the heart of Alexandria, a labyrinth of knowledge and memory, where every scroll and tome bore the weight of centuries. The scent of papyrus mingled with the faint musk of dust and oil lamps, a reminder of the countless hands that had touched these pages. Yet beneath the familiar quietude, a whisper of unrest stirred. Rumors of discord had begun to permeate the city, carried on the breath of anxious scholars and servants alike. I moved through the halls with measured steps, my eyes tracing the spines of scrolls that held the dreams and discoveries of humankind. But today, the usual hum of scholarly debate was replaced by a fragile silence, as if the very walls held their breath. In the dim light of a side chamber, I found Callimachus hunched over a delicate scroll, his fingers steady yet his gaze heavy. The elder librarian's eyes, sharp behind round spectacles, met mine with a gravity that rooted me to the spot. "The winds of change are no longer whispers," he said, his voice low and steady. "The city teeters on a blade's edge. We must brace ourselves, for the library cannot withstand the storms to come." His words settled like stones in my chest. The library, our sanctuary, the beacon of human intellect, was vulnerable. The thought was unbearable, yet undeniable. Callimachus spoke of the fragility of our collection, the brittle scrolls, the fading ink, and the dangers lurking not just in fire or sword, but in neglect and the shifting tides of power. I listened, the weight of responsibility dawning upon me. No longer could I be a mere observer, a silent chronicler of fading grandeur. The preservation of knowledge demanded more than reverence. It required action. I felt the stirring of a fierce resolve within, a need to capture not just the facts, but the soul of the library in words that fire could not consume. As I wandered deeper into the halls, the muted footsteps of scholars echoed like distant thunder. Voices rose and fell beyond the walls, discussions fraught with fear, debates laced with despair and defiance. Each sound sharpened my awareness of the fragile peace slipping away. In the quiet of a secluded alcove, I unrolled a fresh piece of parchment and let my hand move with trembling certainty. Verses flowed, weaving the essence of the library's wisdom and the silent prayers of those who walked its halls. These words, I hoped, would live beyond the stone and scroll, enduring when the physical repository could no longer stand. Yet, even as I wrote, the sense of urgency grew. The city's unrest was no longer distant thunder but a gathering storm, its shadow creeping ever closer. I knew that the path ahead would test every fiber of my being, challenging my faith in the permanence of human endeavor. But in that moment, surrounded by the fragile whispers of knowledge, I vowed to become more than a witness. I would be a keeper of memory, a voice for the silenced halls, and a flame of hope against the gathering darkness. The days ahead would demand courage beyond words, yet I clung to the belief that words themselves might yet outlast the flames. And so, beneath the fading light of the afternoon, I set my resolve like a beacon in the gathering dusk, ready to face the trials that awaited the city and its sacred heart, the great library. I write in shadows and whispers, my hand trembling yet resolute, as the hours slip through the endless corridors of this hallowed sanctuary. The great library, a vast heart pulsing with the breath of human thought, looms around me like a sleeping giant, majestic yet vulnerable. Its scrolls, each a fragile vessel of wisdom, rest in silence beneath the weight of centuries. Here, I commit my verses to parchment, weaving between lines the essence of all that we stand to lose. The scent of aged papyrus mingles with the faint tang of ink, a delicate perfume that reminds me of the library's silent promise, that knowledge endures beyond the reach of time. But now, that promise trembles on the edge of oblivion. Outside, the city murmurs with unease, whispers of unrest and flames yet to come. I hear them, the low hum of tension, the clattering footsteps of guards, the distant cries of merchants and scholars alike. These sounds seep through the thick stone walls, as if the library itself breathes uneasily beneath a gathering storm. Tonight, I steal moments from the coming chaos to write, My scrolls are hidden acts of rebellion, secret verses that cradle the soul of Alexandria's intellect. Each word is a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness, a fragile testament against the ruin poised to consume us. I write of the poets who first dreamed these halls into being, of the philosophers whose minds crafted the very foundations of thought. My ink flows with the memory of Callimachus's wisdom, the fierce resolve of Selene's protection, and the soft promise of Nerissa's youthful hope. The library's vast halls echo with silence, save for the faint scratch of my reed pen against parchment. The fragile scrolls, rolled and sealed with care, find refuge in the secret crevices and hidden alcoves I know so well. With every placement, I feel the weight of hope press heavier upon my chest, a secret pact between memory and fire. If these words survive, they may yet outlast the flames that threaten to erase all. Outside, the sky darkens, bruised with the promise of storm and strife. The city's pulse quickens, but here within these stone walls, time seems suspended, a fleeting moment captured between breath and silence. I pause to gaze through a cracked window, the vast expanse of Alexandria stretched beneath a fading light. The salty breeze carries the scent of the sea, mingled with dust and smoke yet to come. It is a poignant reminder of all that is fragile, all that we risk losing. In these verses, I pour my soul, weaving a tapestry of memory and defiance. The words become more than ink. They are a shield against oblivion, a beacon for those who might come after. Though my body may falter, these scrolls, these fragile vessels of thought shall endure. I believe this with a quiet certainty, a faith born not of naivety, but of the enduring power of words. Yet, even as I write, shadows deepen at the edges of my vision. The flames, though not yet kindled, are whispered in every hurried footstep, in every hushed conversation. They are a force beyond command, a symbol of human hubris and neglect, and still I write. Because to cease is to surrender, and I will not surrender the legacy of knowledge without a fight. The hours stretch thin and my hand aches, but my spirit burns brighter with each line. I write for Callimachus, who shared with me the secrets of hidden chambers and lost scrolls, for Selene, whose fierce eyes guard the city's fragile heart, for Nerissa, whose trembling hands will one day carry this torch forward. I write for all who believe that words can transcend even the fiercest blaze. And as the night deepens, I roll my scrolls once more, slipping them into their secret havens. Each hidden verse is a whispered prayer, a promise that though the library may fall, the flame of knowledge will endure, carried not in stone or scroll alone, but in the immortal breath of words. Outside, the distant sounds grow sharper, the city's unrest mounting with every moment. But here, in this quiet sanctuary, I write on a solitary voice against the coming storm, a poet weaving verses in the shadow of destruction. The fire waits, relentless and unforgiving, but so do I, and my words will remain long after the smoke has cleared. The shadows of the great library stretched long over the stone floors, flickering with the restless light of torches held high by scholars and scribes alike. Within one such chamber, the poet found himself seated beside Callimachus, the venerable librarian whose years of service had etched wisdom and wariness into every line of his aged face. The air was thick with the scent of ancient parchment and dust, mingling with the faint aroma of oil lamps burning low in the encroaching dusk. Callimachus' voice was low but urgent, his eyes sharp beneath round spectacles as they met the poet's. "We stand on the precipice," he said, his tone heavy with unspoken fears, not just of fire, but of forgetting. "This library, our sanctuary, is fragile not merely in its walls, but in the minds and hearts of those who would protect it." The poet nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle deep within his chest. Around them, other scholars murmured in agreement, voices weaving a tapestry of worry and resolve. One young man, his fingers ink-stained and trembling, spoke of scrolls too delicate to move, of knowledge too precious to lose yet too vulnerable to save. Another, a woman wrapped in a simple tunic, recounted the city's growing unrest, the the political factions dividing like a wound that would not heal. Their lament was not merely for books or scrolls, but for the very essence of human endeavor, the collective memory and wisdom painstakingly gathered over generations now threatened by forces, both human and elemental. The poet listened intently, his heart pounding with a mixture of despair and determination. Each word, each sigh, etched itself into his mind, compelling him to act. Later, in a quiet alcove shielded from the murmurs and clatter beyond, the poet unfurled a fresh piece of parchment. His hand trembled slightly as he dipped his reed pen into ink, the dark fluid pooling like a promise on the page. He wrote not only to record, but to defy the fragility of knowledge, made all the more poignant by its imminent peril. Every verse was a breath held against the coming storm, an invocation of hope whispered into the gathering dusk. Outside, the city's turmoil seeped through the thick stone walls. Voices rose in heated debate among political factions, their words sharp and discordant, echoing the fractures threatening to rend Alexandria apart. The poet could hear snatches of their arguments, calls for pragmatism, dismissals of the library's worth, and veiled threats carried on the wind. Within these walls, the fragile sanctuary of wisdom, such discord was a bitter undertone to the scholar's solemn reflections. Yet amidst this, the poet found a growing resolve. The laments of Callimachus and his peers were not mere echoes of defeat, but a summons to action. The verses he committed to parchment were more than words, they were a beacon. A fragile promise that the essence of their collective human spirit might endure beyond the physical destruction looming ever closer. As night deepened, the library's corridors grew quiet, save for the scratching of the poet's pen and the distant clash of voices beyond. He paused, listening to the silence that settled like a shroud, before returning to his task. The fate of Alexandria's knowledge hung precariously in the balance, but within the poet's verses stirred the first flicker of defiance, a flame born not of wood or papyrus, but of the enduring power of words. The sun had barely risen when I found myself at the library's outer courtyard, the great stone walls looming like silent sentinels against a restless sky. The city breathed uneasily around me. The usual morning chorus of merchants and scholars was muted, replaced by a tense undercurrent of whispered rumors and hurried footsteps. Alexandria, proud and eternal, seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the inevitable storm. I paused beneath an ancient olive tree, its gnarled branches casting long shadows over cracked stones. Dust hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of baked earth and distant smoke. Somewhere beyond the walls, voices rose and fell, a cacophony of fear and defiance. It was then that I noticed her. She stood like a statue at the gateway, a sentinel carved from determination and strength. Selene. The city guard whose name had passed my lips only in fleeting conversations, now a vivid presence before me. Her dark hair was cropped close, practical and unyielding as the resolve that burned in her eyes. The shadows of early light caught the sharp angles of her face, and her stance was one of alert readiness, a living barrier between chaos and order. Our eyes met briefly, and I sensed an unspoken question. What brings a poet to the edge of war? I hesitated, clutching the fragile parchment tucked beneath my robes, a testament to fragile hope. Selene's gaze softened for a moment, recognizing perhaps the weight I carried, a burden invisible to most but as tangible as the stones beneath our feet. Suddenly a commotion shattered the uneasy calm. From the narrow street adjacent to the courtyard, a handful of roughened men surged forward, their intentions clear in the glint of stolen knives and greedy eyes. They moved with reckless abandon, tearing at the stalls that lined the way, aiming to seize what little treasure the city still guarded. Selene's voice cut through the chaos like a clarion call. "Back!" she commanded, her tone unwavering. The men faltered beneath her fierce gaze, as if confronted by a force greater than any blade. With swift, precise movements, she advanced, a dance of discipline and strength honed by years of duty. Her presence was a shield, not only for the goods, but for the fragile heartbeat of Alexandria itself. I watched, heart pounding, as she confronted the marauders, her words sharp and clear. This city stands on more than stone and coin. You threaten its soul. Leave or face justice. The men, cowed by her unwavering stance and the sudden arrival of reinforcements, scattered into the labyrinthine alleys. The courtyard settled back into uneasy silence, the echoes of conflict lingering like a bitter aftertaste. Celine turned to me then, her breath steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "You should not be here alone," she said, eyes searching mine. "These are dangerous times for those who carry the weight of words." I nodded, feeling the fragile parchment beneath my hand as if it were a talisman. "And you, guardian of the city's flesh and blood, what drives you to stand so fiercely at this precipice?" Her gaze drifted toward the towering silhouette of the library, its grand arches bathed in the golden light of morning. "This city is more than walls and warriors," she said softly. "It is memory, culture, the very breath of our people. If those fall, what remains?" In that moment, a fragile alliance was forged not through words alone, but through shared purpose. She was the shield to my pen, the sword to my verses. Together, perhaps we might stave off the darkness gathering like a storm on the horizon. We moved beneath the shadowed corridors of the library's outer halls, the scent of ancient parchment, and ink mingling with the distant rumble of unrest. Celine's steps were sure and measured, each footfall a promise of protection. The stained glass windows caught the fading light, fracturing it into a kaleidoscope that danced upon the cracked marble floors. Our conversation delved into the depths of purpose and duty. She spoke of the weight of a soldier's oath, the sacrifices made to shield the innocent. I shared the burden of a poet's hope, the belief that words could outlast the fiercest flame. Though our worlds seemed disparate, we found common ground in the desire to preserve what mattered most. As dusk folded over the city, we stood once more beneath the open sky, the horizon painted with the first flickers of distant fires. Celine's voice was steady, a vow whispered against the growing night. "I will protect you and your verses, as long as breath remains in my body." I clasped her hand, a silent pledge passing between us. The library might burn, the scrolls might crumble, but in this fragile bond lay a spark of resistance, a promise that the flame of knowledge would not be extinguished so easily. And so, as the shadows deepened and the city held fast against the gathering storm, I felt the strength of an unexpected ally beside me. Celine's resolve became my shield, her courage a beacon. Together, we would face the fire and perhaps, in the ashes, find a new dawn. But the night was long and the flames hungry. The true test was yet to come. The sun had barely risen when I found myself weaving through the labyrinthine alleys of Alexandria's merchant quarter. The air thick with the mingled scents of salt from the sea and the faint, persistent odor of smoke from distant fires. My mind, a tempest of anxious verses and fleeting hopes, clung to a single purpose, to secure the materials without which my verses might remain imprisoned in thought alone. Parchment and ink, the very lifeblood of preservation, were scarce commodities now, their availability undermined by the city's mounting unrest. The merchant's warehouse stood at the end of a narrow street, its heavy wooden doors ajar, revealing a cavernous interior dim-lit by oil lamps whose flames flickered like hesitant stars. I hesitated on the threshold, the weight of what I sought tightening around my chest. The air inside was thick with dust and the unmistakable musk of dried animal skins, the raw source of the precious parchment stacked in towering piles. From the shadows emerged the merchant himself, a man whose weathered hands and cautious eyes bespoke years of hard negotiation and survival. His garments bore the dust and grime of constant travel and trade, practical and unadorned save for the glint of a small, ornate ring on his finger, a silent testament to past fortunes or lingering hopes. "You come seeking supplies in troubled times," he said, his voice low and steady, betraying neither warmth nor scorn. "Tell me, poet, what price are you willing to pay for words when the city itself is on fire?" His words struck a chord within me, a stark reminder that in this place, Survival was a currency as real as gold. Yet, I met his gaze with the quiet fire that had kindled in my soul since the first wisp of destruction reached my ears. "Not gold, but promise," I replied, "that the words I write will outlive these flames, that knowledge shall not perish even if the walls that house it do." He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of mirth but rich in understanding. "Promises are fragile things," he said, "but so too is parchment." Our negotiation unfolded amidst the creak of wooden beams and the soft rustle of scrolls being shifted and recounted. I watched as he measured quantities, his fingers deft and sure, weighing the risks of parting with his precious stock. Outside, the murmurs of the city's unrest seeped through the walls, a distant cacophony of anger and fear that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the city itself. Yet in this dim sanctuary, a fragile accord took shape. The merchant agreed to supply me with enough parchment and ink to commit my verses to life beyond memory, on the condition that I would safeguard his interests should the turmoil spill into his world. It was an uneasy alliance, born of necessity, but one that breathed new purpose into my mission. As I left the warehouse, the scrolls secure beneath my cloak, the weight of responsibility settled more heavily upon me. The city's shadowed streets whispered of approaching storms, but within me burned a quiet resolve to etch the fleeting light of knowledge onto fragile leaves that might one day kindle hope anew. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril both visible and unseen, yet with every step I took, the verses forming in my mind grew clearer, a testament to the enduring power of words, even as the world around us trembled on the edge of oblivion. I knew that in the days to come, every scrap of parchment would be a battleground, every line written an act of defiance. And so I pressed forward, the ink-stained hands of a poet bound to a city's fading light, determined to capture the soul of Alexandria before it was lost to ash and memory. The merchant's pragmatism grounded my soaring hopes, reminding me that the survival of knowledge required more than passion. It demanded cunning, alliances, and sacrifice. In this fragile balance, I found a new rhythm to my verses, a cadence shaped not only by dreams but by the harsh drum of reality. And so, with scrolls in hand and fire at the gates, I prepared to write the stories that might one day rise from the ashes, a testament not to what was lost, but to what could endure. But even as I clung to this conviction, a shadow of doubt crept in the question of whether words alone could withstand the coming storm. Yet, in that doubt, I found the seed of resolve. For if knowledge was to survive, it would do so not merely through preservation of texts, but through the unyielding spirit of those who dared to remember. And so the ink flowed, the scrolls multiplied, and the poet's heart beat on amid the encroaching darkness, a fragile flame against the vast, indifferent night.